Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to another explainer. So today we are exploring a deeply, deeply relatable, but honestly pretty misunderstood daily habit. Yep, we're talking about the good old 10-alarm morning routine. You know the one. We're going to unpack the literal architecture of sleep inertia and ultimately uncover this absolutely fascinating psychological bridge that multiple alarms create for us.
So let me just ask you, do you set 10 morning alarms? Seriously, have you ever set up a whole sequence of them, like every 5 minutes, knowing perfectly well, zero intention, that you aren't actually going to get up for the first few? You hear that first one ring, you smack it off, and immediately roll right back over, completely prepped for the next one to go off. Well, if you do this, you are definitely not alone. And, as we're about to see, the real reasons behind it, they are incredibly fascinating.
Section 1. The 10-alarm ritual, or negotiating the transition. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it pits the societal myth directly against the psychological reality. See, psychology tells us this whole morning ritual is actually how the brain negotiates that harsh, super jarring transition from the safe, unconscious state of sleep right into the demanding reality of your day. Society loves to label hitting the snooze button or setting this long sequence of alarms as just laziness, right? Or a lack of discipline. But psychology frames it completely differently. It's an emotional pacing strategy. It's a legit coping mechanism. There are deep biological and psychological reasons why so many of us rely on this slow morning ritual.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds, battling severe sleep inertia and waiting for the brain to boot up. So to really get the 10-alarm habit, we first have to wrap our heads around the massive biological hurdle we face every single morning, and that's called sleep inertia. It's basically that groggy, heavy, kind of thick transition state where your cognitive functions are taking their sweet time to fully boot up after waking. Just think of your brain like a really complex computer. When you wake up, your brain doesn't just instantly flip a simple switch from off to on. No way! It has to run all these background startup processes. And for some people, this transition lasts way longer and feels intensely heavy. So setting multiple alarms is actually the brain's clever way of creating a slower, much more manageable processing speed as it wakes up. It literally prevents an immediate, overwhelming system overload.
Section 3. Buffering against waking anxiety, or delaying the daily rush.
Okay, let's transition over from the biological side to the emotional side of things. Think about it. When you're deeply asleep, you are completely safe. You are blissfully shielded from deadlines, social expectations, and all that daily stress. But the precise second you wake up, boom, all of those demands come rushing back in at the exact same time. And honestly, it can be a lot to handle. By setting 10 different alarms, you're essentially seeking tiny, bite-sized increments of peace. It acts as this invisible emotional buffer. It basically lets you mentally negotiate with the stress of the day ahead, giving yourself these small, protected little windows of calm before you actually have to put your feet on the floor and face reality.
And that naturally leads us right into a hidden benefit, reclaiming morning autonomy. Let's say you have to wake up early for work or school. You are essentially starting your day by surrendering your time to someone else's schedule. But watch the psychological shift here, because it's brilliant. You hear that first alarm ring, and you actively choose to ignore it. By deciding to stay in bed, you're reclaiming a tiny but super vital bit of autonomy. In that brief moment, you are the one in charge. It provides this incredibly deep sense of psychological comfort and control right before the exhausting day officially begins.
Section 4. Reducing morning sensory shock and pacing the nervous system.
And this brilliantly illustrates the physical side of things, because beyond our thoughts, we really have to consider our nervous system. The sound of an alarm is inherently alarming. It suddenly spikes your heart rate and jolts your nervous system right out of rest. At minute 0, that very first alarm is a true unpredictable sensory jolt. But notice what happens on this timeline next. For the alarms between minute 5 and 20, your brain is already semi-conscious. You're actually anticipating the sound. By the time you get to minutes 25 through 45, you have basically turned a jarring, painful disruption into a safe, predictable, rhythmic countdown. It is far, far gentler on your whole nervous system.
Section 5. The comfort of liminal space and enjoying the twilight zone.
Now, it's really important to clarify a huge misconception here. People who set multiple alarms, they aren't usually trying to get more deep, restorative sleep in those little 5-minute intervals. They know that's not possible. Instead, they recognize that there is a unique, incredibly cozy twilight zone between being completely asleep and fully awake. In this liminal space, this safe, floating transition state, everything just feels better. The blankets feel warmer, the room feels quieter, and the stress of the day simply hasn't fully arrived yet. people who set a sequence of alarms are actively trying to stretch out that time, enjoying this safe, suspended twilight zone before it disappears for the rest of the day.
Section 6, a valid coping mechanism and a gentler bridge to reality.
Look, society gets this wrong. We really have to stop looking at the snooze button as some kind of moral failure. Setting 10 different morning alarms does not mean you're irresponsible, and it certainly doesn't mean you're incapable of getting things done. The mind simply acknowledges that the outside world is loud, it's demanding, and, well, it needs just a little more time to build up the mental armor required to face it. I really want you to remember that phrase, mental armor, because it perfectly captures why the mind requires a gentler bridge between the quiet world of sleep and the loud, rushing reality of our daily responsibilities.
So the crucial point is this. The 10-alarm routine is packed with hidden psychological benefits. Let's recap them. It manages that groggy, intense sleep inertia. It serves as a literal buffer against waking anxiety. It allows us to reclaim a quick sense of personal autonomy. It physically reduces sensory shock to our nervous system. And finally, it extends our time in that comforting liminal space. Basically, it is a highly effective emotional pacing strategy.
I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. What other invisible reasons drive our everyday choices? We do so many things that seem totally irrational on the surface, right? But they make perfect sense once we actually understand the psychology behind them. Sometimes, the absolute hardest part of the day isn't what you have to do. It's simply the act of beginning. Well, if you enjoyed uncovering the hidden psychology behind this morning habit, make sure to subscribe and join us for our next explainer. Because once you start understanding these invisible reasons, you'll see the human mind in ways most people never even notice. Thanks so much for learning with me today.